Performance by Petr Macinka. Let's get started.
Honorable members of parliament, honorable members of the government, citizens. Today I stand here in the Chamber of Deputies of the Parliament of the Czech Republic, not to defend the government in this attempt to express no confidence in the government, but I stand here to defend the Czech Constitution. When discussing confidence in our government about 3 weeks ago, I spoke here mainly to the members of the governing coalition. Now, during the motion of no confidence, I will speak to the opposition members who have called this session. You called it not because the government has lost its parliamentary majority. You didn't call it because there is some comprehensive alternative program that you want to offer. You called it because the President of the Republic, Petr Pavel, decided to arbitrarily interfere in the government's powers, and you decided to politically take advantage of his arbitrariness.
Yeah, it's good to say here that this whole fuss about the vote of no confidence in the government is pretty much a big farce, which is only meant to create a lot of reels and a lot of Instagram videos, which are reels on YouTube. So they have some political material, so they have those speeches, so people from those parties can try out some interpellations and so on and so forth. Yeah, in the end, whether it's the opposition or the government, what's happening here is really nonsense because they're arguing about the president's powers. That's not within their authority. They're players in a football match, and according to one side, one fouled the other. And now those two players are arguing in the middle of the field about whether it was a foul or not, instead of going to the corner with the referee, who is the constitutional court. It's absolutely not their place, but both sides are putting themselves in the role of judges. That's a huge problem, a huge mistake, because democracy is built on 3 pillars: legislature, government, and courts. And here the legislature and the government are interfering with the court's actions and interpretations, right? So that's how it is.
The essence of the problem we're talking about, let's start with some facts. The President of the Republic refuses to appoint the proposed Minister of the Environment, who is of good character, who has gone through elections, and who is today one of the most visible Czech politicians with the support of hundreds of thousands of fans and voters.
Is that so? Yes, that's what's happening, and the president has the right to do it. According to the president's interpretation, in my opinion, not according to, for example, Mr. Rajcek's opinion, but Mr. Rajcek is no longer a constitutional judge, and it was only his opinion. It was not a decision of the Constitutional Court. Then we have, for example, one precedent from 2001, when Miloš Zeman, if I'm not mistaken, filed a lawsuit with the Constitutional Court in a similar matter about appointing the governor of the National Bank on a proposal. But the problem is that back then, well, it's a different situation, it's a different relationship. And even if it was about the president and so on, at that time the president was elected indirectly, which can change the interpretation of what the president can actually do, what mandate he has, and what he could theoretically do. So in this regard, this isn't really a good argument. I'm just mentioning it in case it comes up.
He refuses to appoint him not based on a final court verdict, not based on breaking the law, not based on any constitutional obstacle. He refuses to appoint him solely based on his own subjective value judgment.
Yes, exactly.
However,
that's why he was elected.
The Constitution of the Czech Republic is not an essay about personal sympathies. It is a fundamental legal document. Article 68, paragraph 2 of the Constitution of the Czech Republic states clearly, the President of the Republic appoints the Prime Minister and, on his proposal, appoints the other members of the government and entrusts them with the management of ministries. The word is not mentioned anywhere. If the candidate he likes, the word after a media audit is not mentioned anywhere, nor is the phrase according to the president's conscience. And in addition, Article 62, letter A, gives the President the authority to appoint members of the government, not the right to politically veto them. So the President is not the government's personnel committee, the President is not the moral arbiter of the executive, and the President is certainly not the Prime Minister's superior. The President is supposed to act, not to select. And if we refuse to accept these simple sentences, then we no longer have a parliamentary democracy. We have presidential activism here. As a pretext for this action by President Pavel, the media scandals surrounding our colleague Filip Turek are being used. But the media image itself of the person.
Yeah, and I'd like to say that this is exactly what I was talking about at the beginning. Mr. Macinka is putting himself in the role of a constitutional judge here and interpreting the Constitution as if he were the authority who should interpret the Constitution and decide how it should be interpreted. But he is not that authority. Mr. Macinka is the Minister of Foreign Affairs. That's all he is. He is the executive. He is not the judiciary. He is usurping something here that he has no right to. Yeah? That's just something that needs to be mentioned.
Is not a legal reason. The media image does not constitute any constitutional reason for the President to block the formation of a government or to complicate its activities. In a state governed by the rule of law, headlines from Denic N and other fringe media do not decide. Laws decide. If we were to admit that media pressure is enough to remove a member of the government, then we have just created a precedent that could affect any one of you tomorrow. The President uses unconvincing arguments for his attack on the constitutionality of our political system, arguments that have been refuted many times, even directly to him personally, so either he did not understand this simple reasoning or he does not want to understand it. He is turning to the so-called illegal constructions, which, according to activist journalist Senica, Filip Turek was supposed to have built on his property. The President repeats these statements even though it was personally explained to him that Filip Turek partly inherited and partly bought this property, with the illegal construction already started by one of the previous owners. Is this simple explanation really so difficult for the head of our state to understand that he keeps repeating it, or does it just not suit him?
Yeah, am I understanding it correctly that Filip Turek was simply a partial heir to the property, who then bought the rest, so there were probably several heirs, and he bought out or paid off the other heirs to become the owner, and thus became the owner of the land on which the illegal building stands? No, I don't think that's the argument, right? If you become the owner of, for example, a stolen car, and you know about it, that's not exactly legal, right? It's not exactly legit.
He mentions the alleged shocking statement by Filip Turek about the burned Roma girl. Filip Turek has denied the authenticity of this post about 100 times, yet it is still being thrown at him. And Denic N, which brought this disgusting disinformation, claimed on its website in October, I think, that within a few days, it would provide indisputable evidence that it really happened. They haven't brought anything? It's February, and we're still waiting. Instead of evidence, Denic N showed the Czech public only some hateful racist named Dobesh, which is a real moral beacon. Congratulations. But you, our esteemed opposition, are falling for it. Allow me now a brief, more personal reflection, but please, not an offensive one. What I believe is really going on in the mind of the President of the Republic, Petr Pavel, who argues with words like adoration of a totalitarian regime. And why, based on media fabrications, does he choose such an extreme step as deciding not to respect the Constitution of the Czech Republic? I think that in this case, it's really not about Filip Turek. We might be seeing something entirely different.
Before I let Mr. Macinka finish his sentence, I would like to say that just like many pirates, many media outlets, etc., Mr. Macinka is also extremely hypocritical in this dispute. Because back when Miloš Zeman refused to appoint Lipavsky or didn't appoint two other ministers, back when the then Social Democrats were asking him to do so while forming the government, Mr. Macinka said that the president has the right not to appoint them. So Mr. Macinka's hypocrisy is present here as well. I feel like the only hypocrite in this whole conflict isn't me, because even back then under Zeman I was saying that the president should have this right, because he is directly elected and that power should be decentralized, that the president should have more power. Yeah, no, that he shouldn't just be a signing puppet. Yeah, the only one here who's not a hypocrite in this whole conflict is me. It's really simple because back when this was being dealt with under Lipavsky and Zeman and so on, I was mainly interested in foreign policy. I wasn't much interested in domestic affairs. And I've always been more of a supporter of the semi-presidential system ever since I started following politics. Maybe those of us who have a bit of a tendency in our heads, let's say, a certain sympathy not for authoritarianism but for authority, have an easier position in this than those who have to change their stance depending on what suits them.
We're witnessing a kind of internal struggle within the president himself, who isn't fighting for order and peace, as he assured us during his election campaign. Petr Pavel is now probably fighting a complicated battle with the dark side of his own personality and his own past.
Ovštěn, attention, attention. Psychologist Macinka. So now he's not just a judge, he's also a psychologist.
President? The president criticizes Philip Turk's historical statements from the distant past, while his own biography from the late 80s contains adoring passages related to his involvement in the structures of the then totalitarian regime. I think that everyone who doesn't turn a blind eye correctly perceives the handwritten words of Petr Pavel, who in 1987, at the age of 26, wrote the following: "A great influence," I quote, "a great influence on my later views was the summer of 1968. At that time, we had friends from the Soviet Union visiting us. It was precisely through the contrast between them on one side and the anti-Soviet sentiments on the other that my father explained the essence of the situation to me in a way appropriate for my age. It was more effective than anything else and also more lasting. The ridicule at school from classmates for my defense of our friends only reinforced my opinion." End of quote. Petr Pavel, 1987.
That's intense. What do you say to that, ladies and gentlemen? This is, of course, a true quote, a true statement. And it's a bit different, like when people signed their consent to the occupation in 68 and 70. In those years, because everyone who was in the Communist Party or in the army at higher levels or in the police or in public security or in the secret police, of course, had to express their consent to the occupation in 68, that logically means Andrej Babiš must have signed some form of consent to the occupation at some point. Similarly, Lubomir Metnar, a former member of the Public Security Emergency Regiment, most likely signed or had to sign consent to the occupation. And actually, basically everyone who ever held a slightly higher position in Czechoslovakia had to sign some kind of consent. So in this regard, it's necessary to say that Petr Pavel spoke very proactively here. But on the other hand, it was during the times of totalitarianism. It was at a time when, let's say, if someone wanted to achieve something, they had to tread water, so to speak. And I am more convinced that true values and a person's authenticity are shown more by freedom than by totalitarianism. So that's how it is in this regard. However, of course, Petr Pavel has a rather controversial past.
I understand that this is something President Pavel definitely can't be proud of or happy about today. And that's why he's doing everything he can to erase, destroy, eliminate, and forget this part of his past.
Great. On the other hand, I'd like to add that voters elected Petr Pavel knowing about this past. They also elected Petr Pavel knowing that he would be choosing the ministers. Several times during the campaign, he said that, for example, he wouldn't appoint Okamura as a minister. So despite all these flaws, the president was elected. And the fact that Petr Macinka is using this as a defense for why Petr Pavel should appoint Turek, that doesn't seem very fair to me.
I think he's projecting this very infamous part of his own past onto Filip Turek, whom he attacks through alleged admiration of the totalitarian regime.
It's also appropriate to say that Petr Pavel apologized for this and made up for it, while Filip Turek is actually still the same and hasn't made up for anything at all. He's clawing his way to power even though he has absolutely no reputation behind him, which definitely wasn't the case with Petr Pavel. If Filip Turek had spent 5 or 10 years now as a member of parliament, doing a good job, being prominent, not sending people to the gas, not insulting them, not being an edgy little brat, he probably would have made up for it too, but that didn't happen, did it?
But who really showed this adoration, and who just had borderline humor? Answer this question for yourselves, and I truly and without exaggeration ask you for at least some basic objectivity. The president also likes to talk about Filip Turek's disrespect for the rules, yet it is he himself who is breaking the highest rule today, the Constitution of the Czech Republic. The president criticizes Filip Turek for his sharp tongue, while at the same time making statements about foreign statesmen that other politicians would not get away with. I don't think there's any point in repeating the words he used to describe, in his view, a repulsive human being who happens to be, I quote, the President of the United States of America, who leads the country that is our most important ally in the North Atlantic Alliance. You know, I understand that this is a great trauma for Mr. President as well, and he would most likely like to take his words back. Here, too, there's a parallel where he might feel that by attacking Filip Turek's harsh statements, he can erase or even atone for the harsh statements he himself made. I don't know. So maybe this isn't really a dispute about just one name. Maybe there's some kind of projection happening here. Projecting one's own shadows onto someone else. Just to be clear, I'm not saying this as any kind of accusation. Please don't take it that way. I'm saying this as an attempt to understand Mr. President.
Psychologist Macinka. Great, wonderful. Yeah, in this regard, Petr Pavel, of course, has, let's say, made mistakes. He made mistakes, he made incorrect statements. As for the statement about Donald Trump, that's something that's absolutely accurate and he should never take it back. On the contrary, I appreciate that he was willing to say this because it's simply an absolute fact. It is, and the vast majority of the world knows it. Yeah, pretty much. However, of course, it's true that this can't really make Petr Pavel more likable to Donald Trump. Definitely not. I'd also like to add here, we'll see what's in the Epstein files, whether it gets confirmed or not. Just how repulsive a human being Donald Trump actually is. But there's one thing that's good to say here. The fact that there's a difference between one sentence from the president versus the official policy of the government or ministry, which, for example, Macinka outlines for us here.
Because people sometimes fight most convincingly against what reminds them of their own past, which they would rather forget, and with them, some others as well. Even so, as the chairman of a political party that is part of the governing coalition, I cannot accept the fact that the President of the Republic himself, in the case of Filip Turek, unbelievably trivializes our constitutional order with words. And I quote, "It is not decisive whether individual statements and actions undermining constitutional values have been proven against him, but whether a significant part of the public perceives them this way. So, I offer the President a small, possible hypothetical parallel. It's the same as if the chairman of the Senate, during the inauguration of Petr Pavel, refused to accept his presidential oath with the same words about the opinion of a significant part of the public, referring to his statements approving the invasion of Soviet and other troops into Czechoslovakia in 1968.
But that's a completely different situation. The president is elected by the people. He is elected directly by the people. A minister is not. That's a completely different situation.
If the president of the Senate, just like Petr Pavel today, said that despite the election results, someone like advisor Petr Kolář should become president and that he would accept his oath without any problem. Does it seem to you too?
I'm not interested in the Olympics.
Definitely yes. Both this hypothetical situation and the non-hypothetical one created by President Pavel. Dear colleagues, elections were held in the Czech Republic and based on their results, a winning coalition was formed consisting of the Action of Dissatisfied Citizens Movement, Freedom and Direct Democracy, and Motorists for Themselves.
Exactly, and likewise elections were held in the Czech Republic based on which the president was elected, and he was elected through a direct vote. Whereas the coalition, the six-party coalition of motorists, etc., did not come from a direct vote.
They jointly signed a coalition agreement. Among other things, it determines the division of ministries. No one else, except for the mentioned government movements and parties, has the right to speak into or interfere with this arrangement. That's because it's the result of the sacred will of the voters, which must be respected. It must be respected by us, the coalition parties, as well as by the President of the Republic, who really is not the fourth party in our government. It's no secret that President Petr Pavel has long held positions that are identical to your program, dear opposition, to the program of the opposition, and to the positions of your representatives, but not with the positions of the government majority. To put it briefly, it's a repeated and uncritical glorification of the so-called civil society as a substitute for political parties. It's a sympathy for abolishing the Czech crown and the national right of veto in the European Union. It's strong evidence of destructive green policies, which even the government itself is often very reluctant about, to put it mildly. I don't think these are any random signals. That's a consistent political line, but it's not the line of the government of the Czech Republic. It's your line. The opposition line. Mr. President is clearly positioning himself here as someone who wants to balance the government programmatically and ideologically. When he intends to defend and promote opposition positions, and thus the positions of only one part of society.
This is that extreme cohabitation. Cohabitation is also, for example, that Babiš and Pavel agreed that they would handle foreign affairs themselves, and Macinka can go to hell, basically. We'll talk more about it. We'll also play Babiš's statement after his meeting with Pavel.
Of the entire Czech Republic, which actually makes him the real opposition leader. I'm really sorry, gentlemen Rakušan, Kupka, Výborný, Hřib, and you, colleague from Starostové a Nezávislý 09, I just forgot your name, for which I deeply apologize through Mr. Chairman. President Pavel will simply never be the president of everyone again. That bridge has been definitively burned. To stick with my own terminology from last week, let me also briefly comment here on the current short message service gate. when the president accused me of blackmail? Well, I don't know. I think his interpretation of Czech law has repeatedly proven to be rather emotional in the past. So I insist that, of course, this is not blackmail at all. For the record, let me remind you of one of several very similar examples we've seen in the past. Here's an article where former Pirate Party Member of Parliament, Mr. Ferjenčík, is sitting here together with Mr. Skopeček from Civic Democratic Party.
If I'm not mistaken, Ferjenčík wasn't a member of parliament at that time.
If Zeman doesn't appoint a government that would have a majority after the elections, we'll reduce the castle's budget to 0.
Yes, the main thing to understand here is one thing, you know. There's a difference between saying this publicly, declaring it, and writing it in a text message in the style of Don Corleone. The form is important too. What Macinka is doing here, no one has ever dared to do to the president. No one ever sent such a letter or such a text message to Zeman, Klaus, or Havel formulated like this. There has never been anyone so incredibly and shamelessly bold here as Macinka.
People used to say this tough talk in public back then, but I wrote my reports privately, and not even to the president.
Exactly.
But to his friend and associate Petr. So I wrote it as one of the main representatives of today's opposition camp. It was communication with the opposition. And let's be honest, dear colleagues, you don't exactly go easy on us here either. Even you, when you recently took control, you didn't hold back. Let me remind you of the talk that if Andrej Babiš wins the election, Putin will call him and tanks will arrive. That was really exceptionally stupid. And there were similar expressions or statements from your side here in this chamber, and not just here, definitely hundreds. So someone is figuratively burning bridges, but someone else is outright threatening with Putin. You know, as I already said on television over the weekend, top-level politics isn't for princesses. Breaking down over one or two sharply worded private text messages may not be a sign of the resilience that is an essential trait for a top-level politician. You know very well that at international forums, despite the often declared unity, there is a tough clash over the promotion of national interests. It's really no walk in the park, and that's why a politician representing our country at these forums must know how to show their elbows, not tears. We can't eat those. Dear colleagues, I really appreciate this chamber. That's also why I'm standing here today, why I'm speaking here today.
Those phrases were clearly written by AI.
I couldn't be here yesterday, but the climate crisis ended, so there were no flights from Frankfurt. Today, I'm only rejecting one thing here, and that's the so-called double standard of the opposition. I reject the situation where the opposition, without its own meaningful program or project, has fallen under the influence of activist groups that are now effectively organizing an early presidential campaign. Today, this isn't about a lack of confidence in the government. It's an attempt to legitimize the violation of the Constitution and turn it into political capital. And motorists will not assist with that. Thank you for your attention.
Well, I think this little joke can only end in two ways. Motorists will gain strength based on the fact that the dispute with Pavel, in the eyes of some loud minority, will make Macinka stand out. And the fact that motorists will gain strength will be at the expense of Andrej Babiš, who in this dispute doesn't really distance himself enough from the president. Yeah, so this could be one of the scenarios that those few radical idiots who voted for action of dissatisfied citizens will now say, that Macinka is actually a badass, and they'll be more inclined towards him. Which will of course lead to the weakening of the action of dissatisfied citizens movement, maybe freedom and direct democracy, and the strengthening of the motorists, which will bring that classic rivalry among the government parties. As Miloš Zeman said, there are 3 levels of hostility. The first level is an enemy, the second level is an archenemy, and the third level is a coalition partner. Well, at this moment, if motorists gain strength at the expense of action of dissatisfied citizens or freedom and direct democracy, then of course it will definitely be cohabitation, right? And the second case, how it could turn out, then really the majority of society will say what I think most people really believe. And that is that Macinka, what a clown he is. That's ridiculous. It's not that we don't like him, he's just laughable. And a politician can't become ridiculous. You can hate him, you can love him, but you can't laugh at him. As soon as you laugh at him, that's the beginning of the end. So based on that, the motorists will weaken even more. They already had less than 5% in previous polls. And of course, that will bring even more nervousness. And the fact that Macinka continues to use language that Babiš said he wouldn't use is a clear sign. Well, he's lacking a certain discipline, isn't he? Which won't bring order to the coalition ranks. And it probably won't bring order or harmony to the relationship between the president and the minister either. Well, we'll see what comes of it. After all, we're still in the Czech Republic, where the president, even though his powers are quite limited, has much more respect and much more authority than his official position would suggest. And since it's probably not going to change, maybe the interpretation of the Constitution should change and the president should be given more powers, because he is directly elected by the people, unlike the ministers. So that's how it is. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you think about that? What's your opinion on that? Write to me in the comments and keep watching the stream. We will be discussing the lawsuit against Tomia Okamoru, which I, well, through my viewers, allowed to file. And we'll also look at other topics. So that's that. See you for now. Bye.